Let's just say that they're ill. And
Okay. I'm going to hint that they've died, but you can maintain. You can be the voice of reason who maintains that they're simply ill and they'll be better any day now.
yes, I will do that.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. We're back. We're still alive. Phil has pulled out, what would you say, Phil, about a third, 50%? How much of your hair is remaining?
Oh yeah, I mean, it just looks absolutely hideous.
Yeah, he's got a sort of a mad professor look going on right now with just the sides are tufts.
Just clumps missing all over the place.
Really not methodical with the pulling of the hair. I have, I was going to say chewed my fingernails, but I'm looking at about 1.5 knuckles left on each hand, each finger on average. So I think I've been dealing with the stress fairly well. But we're still quarantined. We are still locked up. We're still stir crazy. And we're still talking about MMA. And, folks, on this week's episode of Heavy Hands, I'm your host, Conor Rebush, by the way. That was Phil McKenzie you heard talking just before. On this week's episode, we thought we would do a little fantasy matchmaking. What are we calling this, Phil? The Corona Clash?
I believe so.
The Corona Clash. The Corona Clash. Musical sting there. Our premise is the champion of each of these stacked, exciting divisions has tragically fallen ill. Phil would like to remind you that they are still alive, but
they are not dead, Connor.
But they're not doing well. I have to tell you that much. They're not doing well. All right. So Henry Cejudo, Khabib Nurmagomedov, and Kamaru Usman, they're on the ropes. And not in the way they would like to be. Meaning, they're no longer the champions of their divisions. They are no longer stepping into the octagon. These three divisions, bantamweight, lightweight, welterweight, these three UFC weight classes have become wild wests in and of themselves. And so what we're going to do is randomly seed a bracket from more or less our feeling of the top 8 fighters, the top 8 contenders in each of those divisions, and discuss the matchups between them. We did not go straight down from number 1 to number 8 for these brackets. Most of them include, most of them are comprised of mostly the top 10 fighters. But we've added in a couple ones to sort of replace fighters that we feel are sort of on their way out of the top 10 with fighters that should soon be breaking in, if the UFC ever happens again, that is. So I think that's all the ado we really need. We're now going to randomly seed these brackets. So we are about to find out, potentially, what might potentially be some very crazy matchups to determine who will be the new champion. And we're going to start with bantamweight. Henry Cejudo is, he's having a rough time of it. It turns out that hair is a superior vector for the disease. There is no face mask in existence that could possibly cover that coiffure on top of Henry Cejudo's head. It was just riddled with the pox, and he has fallen terribly, terribly ill. So we are left with, do you want to read off our picks and then randomize and tell us what our seed is? Who's in our bracket?
So we have, Marlon Moraes, Aljamain Sterling, Peter Yan, Corey Sandhagen, Rafael Assunção, Jimmy Rivera, Cody Garbrandt, and in a pick of blatant favoritism,
That's
despite
right.
him rounding out somewhere near the top 15, Chito Vera.
I thought we were doing Munoz instead of Garbrandt, but I kind of like having Cody in there. We need to have a certain meathead quotient to sort of balance out the whole tournament, I think. And without Cejudo, there is no bigger meathead in the division.
Yep.
All right. Yes, the blatant favoritism. Chito Vera probably won't make it far. We'll see what his first matchup is, but I think he's going to make things interesting. Okay, let's find out our 4 matchups to start off this tournament.
Okay, do you want me to tell you all of them at once, or should we just go through each one and preview it?
Let's go through, titillate me, Phil. Let's go through, just do one at a time. I'll be excited and amazed.
The first one, you're gonna love the first one.
Uh-huh.
It is Rafael Assunção and Cody Garbrandt.
Oh, boy. Yes. This is a fight that I was very much intending to see live before all of this kicked off. It was supposed to happen in Columbus, in the capital of my very own home state. And I don't think this is a surprise. I've probably mentioned this matchup on the show before. It was my cruelest wish, was that Cody Garbrandt would finally receive what felt like a step down in terms of star power, but not in terms of how easy the matchup would be. I think Rafael Assunção knocks Cody Garbrandt out. Your thoughts?
I think it's looking increasingly likely. Because as we've seen, Garbrandt is a somewhat limited boxer who really works at his best when people are trying to track him down, and gets incredibly frustrated when he's involved in lengthy exchanges and just tends to set his feet and swing. And this is really all Assunção is. I mean, I don't want to say this is all Assunção is good at an elite level, because he's good at many things, but when his game is pared down, and he does pare it down quite a bit when he's up against elite competition, it really is him just looking for a single well-timed counter right hand.
Yep.
And Cody Garbrandt has shown that he has absolutely no fears of running into a single well-timed counter right hand.
Yep. I mean, it's obviously, a dangerous matchup. Like, Garbrandt is incredibly quick. Marlon Moraes did just nearly knock Rafael Assunção out. Mm-hmm. He can be a little... Assunção has great eyes, great instincts, but in terms of, like, the sort of form of his defense, he's open in a lot of exchanges. He carries his chin quite high. He doesn't keep much of a guard. But he can move his head. He tends to see things coming. He moves his feet very well. So I think while risky, as every fight with Garbrandt is, I agree. It's just sort of tailor-made for Assunção. He's got the counter punches, he's got the speed, he's got the defense, and very importantly, something that was very effective for Dillashaw, he's got a really effective kicking game to rely on. Kicking game and a great jab, both to draw out the exchanges and to force Cody Garbrandt to be the one who really needs to lead with the more involved attacks and expose himself. So, Rafael Assunção.
Yeah, it's quite a cruel matchup in some ways, because I feel that there are many other people in this tournament that Garbrandt would do a lot better against, frankly.
Yeah, I agree. Garbrandt would have a good chance of beating quite a few of these guys.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Assunção is... he's the Jake Shields for Cody Garbrandt. He is like the least valuable win and one of the more dangerous, more likely losses at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing that would give Garbrandt the main advantages Garbrandt has is that Assunção still fights at a glacially slow pace for a bantamweight when he's up against elite competition. He ups it if he's up against people that he knows he's just better at than everywhere. But it makes him a very unpredictable round winner. And Assunção, I mean, he's clearly a hard puncher. People get scared off when they get hit by him, but for the standards of bantamweight, he's not actually a particularly hard puncher, because this division is full of brick-fisted hitters.
But he's quick-handed and accurate, and I think that's what you really need. I don't know that TJ Dillashaw is that hard of a puncher either.
Mm-hmm.
And he got Garbrandt out of there twice. So.
Yep.
Okay. Well, Rafael Assunção moves on to, what would that be? The quarterfinals?
Semis, I think.
The semifinals. Okay.
So next we have Aljamain Sterling against Corey Sandhagen. And this is an interesting one. Again, I think this is a
good fucking division, dude. Can I just say that?
Yeah.
Any one of these matchups are enthralling to think about.
Yeah, I mean, because I was thinking about Sandhagen, I didn't really I wasn't really thinking of him as having a significant chance of winning this, but he really would be tough, I think, for a lot of these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. He's an incredibly adaptable fighter. He has a really challenging frame that he uses very, very well. He's just technically super sharp, and he is fearless. He will fight whatever kind of fight I think is needed to beat a given opponent. Like, he has the skill to do the back foot thing, which I think he could compete with Sterling in that regard, but also he might just try to walk Sterling the fuck down and get in his face and hit his body. And can he stop Sterling's wrestling?
Yeah, that's the thing, because that was I was expecting to be the difference when Sandhagen fought Assunção.
Mm-hmm.
And
Assunção did have some success.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, and particularly as the fight went on.
Yeah.
I think his wrestling started to come alive a bit more.
I think he realized
it was mostly just that he was able to keep the volume and the pressure on Assunção, and Assunção was a much more willing striker. So yeah, I mean, this is a real tricky one, because I think that Sandhagen has a really strong chance of just drowning Sterling.
Yeah, but I don't want to undersell Sterling as a striker either. Like,
no,
he's very, very competent at a sort of range boxing style. What has even become more of a boxer-puncher kind of style. He's gotten more comfortable just being aggressive and. But I don't know. I do feel that Sandhagen is a tighter technician, more consistently like defensively responsible. Like, Sterling has the moves, but because of his technique, he cannot chain together sequences as long or as cleanly as Sandhagen can. When Sterling moves his head once, maybe he can come back with a counter. When he avoids the next shot, there's no counter possible. He's out of position. He has to back off and reset, usually. Sandhagen is much more capable of keeping himself in position, keeping his feet under him, so he can throw weight into his shots. So, yeah, I do think the big question is just, can Sterling out-wrestle Sandhagen? And Sandhagen he's a willing grappler. Like, not in the sense that he will just go out there. I wouldn't expect him to just go out there and engage in a grappling contest with Sterling. That would be pretty stupid. But, sort of that, like, the fearlessness that, like, Whitaker showed in his first fight with Jacare, where he does stay really calm on the ground with really dangerous grapplers and just make the right decisions. So I'm not confident that if Sterling did get him down, that he would have a super easy time holding him down compared to some other fighters. I think Sandhagen might just stay calm and work his way free. I might take Sandhagen there.
Yeah, I'm not... Yeah, it's a really tough one. And also, I think this fight might be one of the ones which is actually... Has this fight been booked? Like, as in a very, very tentative booking?
It should. It's a great matchup. I don't know.
I instinctivly want to pick Sterling because I still remember like Sandhagen. Is it Sandhagen or?
I don't know. I've already said both in the course of this conversation alone.
Yeah. I still remember that fight with Yuri Alcantara, which is probably biasing me a lot, where he was just in huge trouble. Mm-hmm. But admittedly, it looked like he was pretty badly hurt for a lot of that first round.
Mm-hmm.
But
also, getting through that to then savagely destroy Alcantara is not a bad look either.
Mm-hmm. And it was, a while ago, and he's clearly improved since.
Yes.
Yeah, I might agree with you, just because I think that Sterling might be someone who needs his frame to insulate him a bit,
right?
And he won't necessarily have that against. He won't have that so much against Sandhagen, who I think is going to be just much more comfortable in that kind of fight.
Part of what makes it so tough to determine is that Sterling has not really had many fights against people with a frame like his.
Yeah.
Like, the closest parallel is probably Rafael Assunção, who does not have his reach, but has a sort of reachy fighter's style.
Mm-hmm.
But Sterling has come a long way since then, so it's tough to say how much of that largely neutralized performance was just a result of, I mean, a lot of it I think was he just did not have this level of confidence in his striking. But also, the Sandhagen is going to fight in such a way that, you know, Sun Tzu leaves you room for confidence. He kind of wants you to have a certain amount of confidence so you put yourself at risk. Sandhagen is much more of a consistent hammer. He will keep the pressure on you. He will make you feel his reach at every moment of the fight. And I would expect him to pressure a lot and more intelligently than Pedro Munoz, who still, came close enough to winning that fight with Sterling that I could see a sharper version of that style matchup getting it done. You know, it was a tough fight for Sterling. He got hurt. He had to fight his way out of scrappy exchanges. I just think Sandhagen is way better defensively than Munoz with Sterling's kind of reach and build. So, I'm going with Sandhagen there.
Okay. And I guess we've probably got to step these up because we've got to get through a lot of fights.
That's true.
So, third one, Peter Yan, Marlon Moraes. And I think we can probably take this one pretty quickly. Marlon Moraes disintegrated on the back foot against Henry Cejudo. Peter Yan is a much better pressure fighter, if not the same physical force that Henry Cejudo is.
Yep.
It seems like a fairly cut and dried chance for Peter Yan to just back him up against the cage and wreck him.
Peter Yan takes every single kick Moraes throws off the back foot as a trigger to surge forward and hit him in the face. Mm-hmm. I think he probably ends up finishing him, although I think we probably get the slower version of Peter Yan, at least for the first half of the fight. We have seen that when he's up against big punchers, people who threaten him, even if it's just like Uriah Faber, whom he's clearly better off than at this point in his career. You get a much more cautious Peter Yan that more slowly builds the attack. But I still think, he can do what Jose Aldo did, but better.
Yep. Okay, and our last matchup, Jimmy Rivera against Chito Vera.
This one was supposed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
This was a match that was made.
And make your case for why Jimmy Rivera would not just fuck Chito up.
He probably does. Let's be real, right? The only thing I will say is that Jimmy Rivera is apt to fight off the back foot. He is apt to let Chito Vera have the kind of fight he wants to have. And I will remind you, perhaps a good parallel for this for Rivera was his earlier UFC fight. And I think Rivera, his style has been more or less consistent throughout the UFC. He's sharpened up little details, but he's pretty much been the fighter he is the entire time he's been in this promotion. So these are better, more predictive, I think, than Sterling's earlier UFC matchups. And that early UFC matchup of his against Yuri Alcantara, again, was not easy. It was a clear win for Rivera, but there were some very hairy moments. He really had trouble with the reach of Alcantara, who, like Chito Vera, is sort of a famously inconsistent but very dangerous fighter. And I think Chito Vera is, at this point, much more committed to pressure fighting and specifically to aggressively firing his kicks. Very important is that he hits the body, and he's very strong in the clinch. Now, Rivera might be able to out wrestle him there, just take him down. Although that's always still interesting with Chito Vera playing from his back. But the clinch, the pressure, the kicking, the body attack, the fact that Rivera always gets tired, even if he has a sharp start to each round, he always wears down and his output wanes by the end of the round. It would have to be a very strong, consistent performance from Chito Vera, but I don't think it's unwinnable. Then again, Chito eats a shitload of more accurate counters than anyone has ever thrown at him before on the way in. So I think it may really come down to Chito's durability, but that still leaves room for it to be very interesting. He's a tough kid.
Yeah, I will say that out of all these people, the one I would most like to see Chito fight would be Sandhagen, because they're kind of the same guy. Just Sandhagen's just unfortunately a bit better at this point.
Yeah, Sandhagen has his mental shit together a little more than Chito, who is
he's just a cleaner, like more thoughtful technician, I think.
But being a thoughtful technician very clearly does not work for Chito Vera.
Mm-hmm.
He just has to go apeshit. As his corner has literally told him, you need to go apeshit, Cheeto.
Excellent.
I don't know.
Yes, you do.
I want to pick Jimmy, but here's the thing. Like, Jimmy would have won that fight with Peter Yan if he didn't just get dropped once per round. And I could see something like that happening.
Yeah, I could see him getting, because the problem is that he does have a historic tendency to slow down in the third round.
Yeah, and he puts
puts
his back against the fence a lot.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's going to be one of those ones where he's still got a tremendous chin. Like, he never gets finished.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it might be one of those ones where he might have a scary third round, but he still would have whooped up on Cheeto quite a bit for the first two.
Well, I want to pick Cheeto for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with my undying love for him. Completely objective analysis. But since we have to agree to keep the tournament moving, Jimmy Rivera robs Cheeto Vera. He takes a robbery decision that I will never get over and moves on to the semifinals. All right, so what are our two matchups now in the semifinals of this tournament?
So we have Rafael Assunção against Corey Sandhagen, and we know how that goes.
We do.
It's a clean and easy win. Well, not easy, but it's a
clear win for Sandhagen.
Non-contentious win, yeah.
He just has the combination of reach and output is too much for Assunção's slower style unless he lands that one perfect shot, which he didn't last time. Even if you do, Sandhagen has a hell of a chin.
Mm-hmm. And, yeah, you just can't counterpunch against someone with a huge reach advantage who doesn't sit down on all of their shots.
Yep.
And then we have a fascinating rematch of Peter Yan against Jimmy Rivera.
I'll tell you what, man. I want to pick Jimmy fucking Rivera.
I am going to pick Jimmy Rivera.
He won that fucking fight, except for those two moments. If he could just have avoided one of those knockdowns.
Yeah.
It's clear that Peter Yan has issues keeping his style going against defensively sound counterpunchers. People who don't get overwhelmed by the flashes of volume and who throw accurate shots back. There are very predictable patterns in Peter Yan's defense. You know, it's pretty rote meat and potatoes defense that is only designed to keep the offense going. But when the offense in and of itself is not crumbling the opponent's defense, then he has trouble getting that momentum going. And without the momentum, he's not that great of a striker.
I think it's also that it's the classic thing that Yan is still a fairly specialized boxer. Like, he's similar to Robbie Lawler in that sense that he can be. Yeah. I think he can show a lot of quality in his area, and he does kick. Yes. And we've seen him, and he's great in the clinch, and he's a much more defined fighter when it comes to trying to greedily grab at the area of space that he wants than Robbie Lawler is. But there's still just the basic problem that he's very heavy on the front foot.
Yep.
And the problem against Rivera was that he kept getting Rivera kept circling away from him and cutting his leg out when he kept moving forward, and then counterpunching him when he came in to beat the leg kicks. So, yeah, I mean, it looks like a very tough matchup for Yan that he managed to win basically through Rivera dropping his guard for a couple of key moments. He had to make big sellout gambles.
Yes.
He had to
huge
whatever those
leaping shifting punches both times, I think, or one was a big head kick.
One was a kick. Yeah.
The other one was a big left shift punch.
Yeah, they were Dodson attacks.
Yes,
like big sellout, shifting things that make you think that the right side is going, but actually it was the left.
But if we compare it to Rivera's performance against Dodson, for example, we can see how he deals with that. How he can deal with that when he doesn't get caught off guard. It's very likely Yan has a competitor's spirit. Like, he sensed those moments. He sensed he was losing, and he sold out, and it made perfect sense to do so. He could very well do that again. Rivera has a really clear pattern to the way his rounds and his fights play out in terms of activity and fatigue. But I think that's a fight that, except for about 30 seconds combined, Jimmy Rivera very clearly got the better of. So I'm picking him.
Yep, same here.
He's the best counterpuncher in the division, and that is that's the toughest style matchup for Jan that we've seen so far, is good counterpunchers. Even Uriah Faber threw him off with counters. So,
okay, championship fight, Corey Sandhagen against Jimmy Rivera.
Interesting.
I'm going to take Sandhagen. I don't think you can counterpunch this man. It might be, I mean, this is the thing. What might be the difference is Rivera's low kicks.
Yes.
Because he was, I think, very incentivized not to throw them against Sterling, because Sterling just had triggers ready to take him down.
Yep.
And he was clearly very upset, like physically discomforted by Sterling's grappling and strength. Like the first time they disengaged, you just saw it on his face.
Yeah.
He was just like, I don't want that to happen again. And without that, he might be able to run the Peter Yan game plan again.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Sandhagen might be just a bit of a tricky matchup there.
Right.
He's just, again, we saw against Asensau, against determined counterpunchers, he doesn't sell out on his shots. He doesn't give you much to counter unless he knows he's got something. He's got a bit of Holloway to him where he's going to try and push you out of position. And he will sell out when you are out of position.
Right. And I already made the case for Chito Vera on the back of Rivera's tough fight with Yuri Alcantara, or at least a clear win again, but the clear problems that Alcantara was able to pose. And we've already agreed Corey Sandhagen is the more self-assured, more consistently confident, and technically sharper Chito Vera. So, yep, your new bantamweight champion, folks. Corey Sandhagen?
Yeah, that guy.
All right.
Yeah, I don't think I would have expected that. I think it is at least partially a... I think there was a lot of matchup dependence going on.
Sure.
But, that was a super interesting outcome that we...
The bantamweight division, man, every single matchup you can make in the entire top 15 is interesting for one reason or another.
Mm-hmm.
I would want to see fucking number 15, Raoni Barcelos, fight any one of these guys. Why the hell not? It's bantamweight. Everything rules.
Yep. Agreed.
All right. Well, Corey Sandhagen, congratulations. Thanks to Henry Cejudo's crippling, but Phil would like to remind you, not yet fatal illness. You are the new champion of the bantamweight division. Expect to fight a much wasted version of Henry Cejudo when he comes back and attempts to reclaim his belt. And you know what? He just might do that against Corey Sandhagen. So that in and of itself, if Cejudo, in the unlikely event that he recovers his health, that's a great sort of title unification bout for us. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, lightweight and welterweight are yet ahead of us after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. All right. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are moving on up the weights, and fortunately we have kept ourselves in this lovely little range where even though the weight classes get bigger, the fighters are not getting markedly worse. We skipped over featherweight, by the way, because we would have to augment, I think, the rules of the tournament. We both agreed that to merely remove Alexander Volkanovski, you kind of just have to assume that Max Holloway is still the champion of that division. A lot of that depends on how he's doing, how close he remains to his prime and whatnot. If you could remove both of them, the featherweight is a fascinating shakeup. So maybe one of these days we'll talk about who wins the matchups between, Brian Ortega and Zabit Magomedsharipov. Who wins between Korean Zombie and, I don't know, Jeremy Stevens, Josh Emmett, or Korean Zombie Brian Ortega is fascinating. But we had to leave it in the dust and move right past 145 to lightweight, where Khabib Nurmagomedov has tragically taken to bed. Does not seem likely to recover. I'm sorry, Phil. I know you don't want me to say that, but he's not doing well.
What will I do with my Dagestani Knuckle Game t-shirt now?
He's done the exact opposite of what the World Health Organization advised. He has only the beard. If only he had just switched to a mustache only. The face mask he was wearing might have saved him. But unfortunately, he's laid up, which leaves us with...
So our current bracket is, well, not bracket, but our current setup is Tony Ferguson, Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, Justin Gaethje, Dan Hooker, Paul Felder, Charles Oliveira, and our wildcard entry, Diego Ferrera.
Oh, yeah. A man who, with one more good win, will be in that top 10.
Yep.
And who has been turning a serious corner. Okay, let's hear the first matchup in our quarterfinal round.
Okay, the tournament is generating, and we have Dustin Poirier against Dan Hooker.
Ooh. My immediate gut instinct is bad for Dan Hooker.
Yeah.
Too much power, combined with a pretty long reach and a sort of rangy style from Dustin Poirier. The fact that he can compete with the kicking game has awful shades of Hooker's fight with Edson Barboza, albeit with less speed. So that's no good. What fights has Dustin Poirier had with long, rangy fighters, though?
I mean, I think the most troubling example for this would probably be the Korean Zombie, because he's a similar kind of anti-phase shifting counterpuncher like Hooker is. Mm-hmm. He's just a better one. But yeah, I think against long rangey guys, it's been, I mean,
there's Holloway.
They haven't been all that good a lot of the time, so he's just clobbered them.
Right.
But, he did, like Bobby Green tried to do some, fancy pants fencing against Dustin Poirier and just got absolutely obliterated.
Poirier just pressured the shit out of him.
Yeah. And who was the other one I was thinking of?
Max Holloway.
Paul Yancy Medeiros. But yeah, obviously Max Holloway is the best example. But Holloway was more two offensive fighters meeting in the center of the cage.
Right. I think Hooker's more interesting because of the sort of outfighting angle we would expect him to take.
Yeah. I think the more I think about it, the more I think that your first instinct is probably correct.
Hooker, I don't think has the gas tank to keep going for 3 or potentially 5 rounds if we're assuming each of these is the main event. Something we haven't discussed, but that might be a factor to keep in mind. But does he have the durability or the athleticism to go 3 hard rounds with Dustin Poirier? I kind of doubt it. Poirier can kick with him. And also, Poirier would very likely beat the Korean Zombie nowadays. Like, the counterpunching style might still be tough, but he's no longer dependent on that ability to shift phases. He will still mix in the wrestling and keep it interesting, but he kind of, back when he fought Korean Zombie, he was much more a fighter who sort of needed to take the fight everywhere. He needed to keep mixing up phases and everything, and now he can just beat the shit out of you on the feet. So,
yep.
It's got to be.
Yeah, so... Yeah, I think a lot of what has made it work for Poirier is his ability to come in behind his jab and to close off combinations with the right hook. Meaning that before it was, in his earlier career, it really was the big cannon of the left hand and the clinch game to back it up. But now he's still got some worrying tendencies if you think about Hooker's counterpunching to shift his feet in the middle of exchanges and things. But the other thing is that Hooker's defense is just not good and never has been.
Right, it's bad.
Yeah, so a lot of those fights against big, tall guys were just Poirier jabbing his way into range as he came in behind it, sort of Dillashaw-esque, and then just absolutely clocking them. And I don't really see why that wouldn't work on Dan Hooker.
Right.
So yeah, Poirier and probably by finish.
Hooker's counterpunching really works against guys who have especially against guys who have a clear intention to come in low, to change levels on an entry, either for a takedown or whatever, or people who just like overcommit and jump into range, or who stay at range. You know, like Ally Quinta. It's either an Ally Quinta or it's like, Gilbert Burns or Jim Miller. These are like the performances that really make Hooker look good. And none of these are guys who consistently come in behind feints and double and triple jabs and off balance their opponent before delivering crushing power. It has to be Dustin Poirier.
Yep.
All right. Up to the semifinals with the diamond. Who's next?
This is going to be fun. Justin Gaethje, Tony Ferguson.
Oh. It's Justin Gaethje. Right?
Yeah, it kind of has to be, doesn't it?
Can I say, I no longer enjoy watching Tony Ferguson's recent fights. They weren't very good, were they?
Well,
they were action-packed.
Yeah.
They always are. But I rewatched this fight with Anthony Pettis, and I'm they're just cutting each other's. It feels so violent because I know what Tony Ferguson is struggling with and how much he's been passed over. There's just this air of tragedy that makes the violence sort of unpalatable. And because they're Tony Ferguson fights, they're insanely violent. So him and Anthony Pettis just carving up each other's faces, and Ferguson barely holding it together and almost getting finished, and then just going to war. Yeah, I just think Ferguson does not have the appropriate respect for range. He does not have. He is entirely a reactive fighter defensively. So in a lot of fights, you can see him developing a defensive approach by the end of the fight. But in the early going, he just walks right into range. So he gets hit on the way in. If he's throwing as he enters the pocket, he might land, but then he stands there. He wants to see what the opponent is going to do. He does not have a defense prepared to reset and start the whole thing over again. So he frequently gets caught really hard and clean. Especially in the early going. I just think Justin Gaethje fucking mauls him, to be honest.
Yeah, the problem is that Ferguson tends to give away at least one early round or at least one early huge knockdown.
Yeah.
It's really hard to see that not happening here and it being really bad for him. I do think there are some things about Ferguson which get slightly mischaracterized, at least from my perspective. I could just be wrong. But I don't think, whilst Ferguson is characterized as a pressure fighter, I don't really think that's what he's best at. As in, I don't think there are because he does not have good cage cutting footwork or even particularly great cage cutting tools. He's a good body kicker, but
he's a pressure fighter in the mold of Sergey Kovalev. He doesn't really cut off the cage. He wants you to be moving backwards. He wants to be advancing at all times.
I think he's a pace setter. I don't think he's a pressure fighter. He wants you to fight at a certain pace.
Sure.
Which is not necessarily the same thing as being very good against, because RDA, I think, is a pressure fighter because he gets exponentially better if you're moving backwards against him. But against people who have had to move backwards, against people where he has to move forwards, where he has to close the distance, Ferguson tends to get real ugly.
Mixed results.
So Barboza, Cerrone, and Pettis, he all just kind of charged them and flailed them to death.
Yeah.
It was sort of like Kevin Lee against Barboza as well, in that they both understood the nature of the matchup, and what was the best way to win it. But it didn't really strike me as being it
was a gambit.
The actual, yeah. So the actual, I think the performances where Ferguson has looked the best are those where he's actually able to keep that pace because the opponent keeps coming at him.
Right.
Like RDA. Or to a lesser extent, Josh Thompson.
Undeniably, the RDA fight was Tony Ferguson's best performance. I think the peak of his career, probably the end of his prime, was right there in that fight. It was the last time he looked really sensational, and he had never before looked that sensational.
Yeah. But I think that's also, it is something to do with the fact that he wants to... It is pace, not directionality, sure, which informs his style. And his defense, as we've mentioned, does get better over fights. He is, I think, one of the more skilled parriers in MMA. He's one of the better people at actually using his elbows and his shoulders and so on to roll punches off and keep coming back, which is why he's able to keep that kind of pace. But as you mentioned, he has to learn how to do that over the course of a fight.
Yeah.
And I could see a scenario where he's able to just able to keep Gaethje retreating into his guard like Poirier did, because he's just pouring shots on as Gaethje keeps trying to close him down.
Sure.
Because once Ferguson stops having to move forward, he's a better fighter.
Sure.
When he is moving forward, he gets, like I said, he's all kind of ugly.
Yeah, he actually he's got what looks a lot more like a very competent boxing game off his back foot sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I could see him duplicating elements of the Poirier game plan.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of them. But the problem is that I think he would get knocked out before that happens.
Well, there's also the fact that Poirier barely, the two guys who have really beaten Gaethje, barely survived. Both of them fought off the back foot. Both of them wore Gaethje down as he came in over and over. He does it very predictably. Although we'll see how that pans out in the future with the latest developments to Gaethje's style. But the problem for both of them that they barely survived is that if you stay back and make Gaethje come after you, he's going to kick your legs to pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that threat is what has... I don't think Tony Ferguson likes dealing with that. I think that is frequently what has caused him to be a way more aggressive pressure fighter and throw himself into the fray. It's whenever he fights a really effective kicker, he wants to close them down and keep them from firing those weapons. So that's a tough call. Either Ferguson runs right into the wood chipper, or he stays back and hopefully he's durable enough. I'll say this, Ferguson is an underrated puncher.
Yep.
He hits pretty hard. He's accurate. He really gets nice extension on his punches. But yeah, I just don't think if Dustin Poirier barely scraped by in that kind of a win, I don't see Ferguson having either the discipline or the durability to weather it the same way Poirier did.
Yep.
All right. So, Justin Gaethje.
So next up we have Charles Oliveira against Conor McGregor.
Weird. Ooh.
Weird.
Very weird. Does Conor McGregor just dust Charles Oliveira with pressure in the first 2 minutes of the fight?
It feels like there's a really, really strong chance that he does.
Right? He may just Max Holloway him. In fact, matchup the fight that Max Holloway won over Chucky Olives was largely a southpaw with straight shots to the body, alternating with straight shots upstairs. That sounds an awful lot, and a lot of pressure, and footwork moving around in open space, and then a lot of backing Oliveira up. That sounds an awful lot like a Conor McGregor approach.
Yeah. I'd like to think there's a chance for Chucky Olives here.
Sure. There absolutely is. I mean, underrated wrestling, quite a good reactive shot. Good clinch wrestling as well. We saw how much trouble McGregor had dealing with the clinch game of Nate Diaz. Chucky Olives, I think, at this point is a significantly better clinch fighter than Nate Diaz.
Yeah, and apart from anything else, he's a much better clinch wrestler.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing that Oliveira has going for him is that a lot of what makes McGregor the most effective is that when he moves forward, people instinctively move backwards.
Yeah.
If Oliveira just came right at him, he has much more of a chance to kind of diffuse that brief early exchange when where Conor McGregor generally does his best work and sort of makes big imprints which carry over into the rest of the fight, where people are suddenly second guessing themselves.
Just the traumatic first few moments of a Conor McGregor fight.
Exactly. So there is, I think, a chance that Charles Oliveira could bypass that. The other thing is that Oliveira is he's a surprisingly physically durable fighter. I think, especially at lightweight.
You mean in that he doesn't fatigue tying up with people?
I just mean that he doesn't get knocked out that much.
A lot less. He's so much calmer. Like it just shows how much confidence has to do with it. That Oliveira just sort of now believing in his ability to handle himself in the pocket. He just doesn't like flinch anymore. And so people hit him really hard and he's fine in ways that he never has been before. I've said it before, but that David Tamer fight was a milestone for Chucky Olives.
Yeah, and I just think that most of his losses generally tend to look like him quitting rather than him actually getting
But
finished.
That's still inside there. We know that will always be in Oliveira's heart. That little voice that says, this could all be over. Just fold. And even if he were to come forward, like if he were to get the chance to pressure, again, I'll think of Nate Diaz as a parallel. Nate Diaz had to weather a lot of counterpunches before, and Oliveira, for all of his the apparent growth in durability and confidence, he definitely carries his chin very high.
Yes.
And allows people to hit him a lot in the early going. There's also the fact that I'm not sure he would pressure McGregor unless he would have to maybe weather the storm, because Jared Gordon backed him right up into the fence and was on him constantly.
Yeah.
I think it's got to be McGregor.
Yeah, it's another one where, like...
It's interesting.
Like Gaethje Ferguson, it would be interesting if it got out the first round.
Yes, but I would give in that first round, I'd give McGregor like a good 65% chance, if not higher, of really hurting Oliveira and getting him out of there.
Yep,
he's a great finisher too. I mean, that's important. He doesn't tend to hurt people and let them recover. So,
and the last matchup then is Paul Felder and Diego Ferrera.
That's a fight I want to see.
So it's kind of a question, I think, of can Diego Ferreira's pressure work on the sheer, brute size and physicality of Paul Felder? Because Felder is a large and powerful and reasonably tireless lightweight. And has historically been someone who has generally been more... He's been, again, someone who has been good at taking out phase shifters.
Yeah.
And has been more comfortable when people come forward onto him than he is pressuring.
True.
So I think it's a tricky matchup. I do tend to favor Ferrera here because Felder has also historically not been a particularly consistent round winner.
Right.
And Ferrera just keeps putting out volume and takedown attempts and is very difficult to discourage. And I think without his ability to leg kick and with his tendency to take way too long to establish his jab, I think Felder would be trying to figure out Ferrera for too long.
Felder really, I think, needs to have some ability to discourage his opponent. When he does win rounds, it's because his opponent shows some kind of blatant weakness, and allows him to build off of that. This is probably true of most fighters, but Felder, in my mind, very markedly, seizes on those little moments of weakness and blossoms when he feels his opponent starting to fold. We saw that with Chucky Olives. We saw it as he built over the course of the fight against Edson Barboza. Barboza's
and Dan Hooker.
And Dan Hooker. Both of those guys, as they started to fatigue and their body language showed more and more caution, Paul Felder got better and better. He builds his confidence by his opponent flagging. And not seeing Carlos Diego Ferreira do that. I do hope that in this matchup, we see the hypothetical Diego Ferreira doing the kind of pressure he did against who's Russian guy? Mairbek Taisumov. Rather than the much uglier Nate Diaz-esque pressure we saw in that Anthony Pettis fight, which was really weird.
Yeah.
Was clearly some intent to stop the kicks off the back foot or something with his bizarre, tie walking his way into the clinch over and over. But either way, I think that amount of pressure, the durability, the volume, and a ground game which is arguably about as dangerous as Charles Oliveira's, without any of those mental cracks, no willingness to slow down.
I don't know if it's as dangerous, but it makes up what it lacks in dynamism. It makes up for in consistency.
Yes, there's not as much finishing potential, perhaps, but it is a non-stop ground game. Ferreira has an answer for every single position. He is just as much a pressure fighter on the ground as he is on the feet.
Yep, and he's way less likely than Chucky Olives to put himself into some kind of checkmate position, be it getting ground and pounded or just tapped out.
Yep.
Whilst going for his own offense.
So it's a question of physicality. It makes it interesting, I think. Ferreira is, he's 5'9" with a 74-inch reach. Paul Felder is 5'11" with a 70.5-inch reach. And he's just a big, broad guy, Paul Felder.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I would have to take Ferreira. Just too consistent. Wins rounds.
Yep.
And doesn't show weakness. So Paul Felder doesn't get those windows to start wheedling his way into the matchup. All right, so give me the first semifinal contest.
Well, it's rematch time. It is Dustin Poirier against Justin Gaethje.
Ooh. And
do we take the coward's way out?
Dustin Poirier barely won that fight. It almost all flew out of his hands at several moments. And by the time he did win it, like Eddie Alvarez before him, he was essentially crippled. 3 more minutes of those low kicks. But at the same time, just way too sharp and way too powerful a counterpuncher for Gaethje to fight without taking immense amounts of damage. I mean...
Yeah, I don't think it's a fight where there's... Unless one of them literally breaks in between these fights.
Right.
Unless one of them gets to a point where their confidence is just shot.
Yeah.
And or they just receive too much damage in sparring and from their career. That you could strongly favor one over the other.
Yeah.
I mean, you could argue that now there's a chance that Dustin Poirier might be mentally a bit shot.
Yeah.
Because the things we hear from him do not sound encouraging. He mostly seems to have completely accepted that Khabib Nurmagomedov can just beat him whenever he wants.
Yep.
And he seems to be kind of angling for money fights.
Yep. It feels as if his drive to become champion has sort of been killed, which I think for a guy like Dustin Poirier, it was a lot of his reason for fighting.
Yeah. And meanwhile, Justin Gaethje is surging on the back of 3 cupcake matchups.
He does not give a fuck about his losses either. He absolutely knew they were coming and expected them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that makes it interesting. Is that enough to pick Justin Gaethje?
Mm.
And does Justin Gaethje fight the same way?
Yeah, I mean, because it's so difficult to say how much of Justin Gaethje's improvements are
because he was fighting Donald Cerrone.
Are durable enough to last in that kind of... I'm not saying that they're not there.
Right.
But it's the fact is, can they be peeled away by a bad matchup?
How much of a Leonard Garcia veneer is this new element of technique? And yeah, how quickly does he just become, I'm back to my bullshit, Justin Gaethje. Lord forgive me. I'm back to my old ways.
Yeah.
But the old ways almost won.
Yeah, they did. Like I said, it's an incredibly competitive fight between these two guys.
Yeah.
I'm going to take Justin Gaethje. I feel like Poirier's. If we're taking them as they are now,
right?
I feel like Poirier's head isn't in it.
I feel the same way.
Yeah.
I think Poirier is too much of a chip on his shoulder and likely a little too intelligent to not have the appropriate baser animal response to that kind of humiliating defeat. Justin Gaethje just has a block of wood for a head. He doesn't give a shit. Mm-hmm. He's going to be Justin Gaethje still. So yeah, I think I agree with you.
That makes me feel sad.
I know. Dustin, who deserves it more than Dustin Poirier? I mean, Gaethje's a nice guy too, but Dustin Poirier, he gives back. He's a really good guy, as far as we can tell.
All right, so we have our other semifinal, which is Conor McGregor against Diego Ferrera.
This is sort of McGregor RDA, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's sort of the matchup we never got to see that I very much would have liked to. It's very interesting. I don't know. The durability, the consistency of Ferrera, that could be a nightmare for Conor McGregor down the stretch.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. He's got to survive.
Yeah.
Because his main... Ferreira's only loss for a long time was to a big punching, lanky featherweight who moved up in Dustin Poirier.
Sure.
And it was by knockout. But he has become significantly less ugly pressure fighter since then.
Yep.
And he's not exactly the cleanest. He's not exactly the cleanest technician on the feet, but he's way improved from who he was back then.
Not great defensively, but largely he's pretty durable. And as tends to be the case, I think more durability, more confidence leads to a greater, at least, impression of durability, greater ability to see shots coming and not worry that they're going to knock you out, and therefore not to get knocked out. I think I'm picking fucking Diego Ferrera in this matchup. It's weird because it's a number 12 ranked fighter at the moment, taking out the guy who is still sort of inexplicably number 3 in the division. But, I mean, Carlos Diego Ferrera has all of what Nate Diaz brought in the second fight to trouble McGregor, the pressure. He has the ground game that sort of neutralized McGregor's killer instinct. McGregor may have finished Nate Diaz at 3 different points in their rematch, except that he did not want to go to the ground with him. He did not want to jump into his guard, and Ferrera is very capable even from his back, and turning that into a top position, turning it into an awful grinding fight. Ferrera has it's sort of Nate Diaz-esque clinch and cage wrestling game that's just exhausting to deal with. He's got a pretty competent kicking game to use if he's coming forward. I kind of like Ferrera in this matchup. Quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth... It's definitely worth considering. I mean, so one of the things we said a lot about Conor McGregor, which is true, I think, both in his boxing fight with Floyd Mayweather and just generally in his MMA career when we've seen it, he is someone who is very bad in confined space. Mm-hmm. He is the inverse Eddie Alvarez in that he is atrocious when he is back to the cage.
Yeah.
And yeah, if Ferrera can push him backwards, I think that's something that would work against McGregor quite a lot. McGregor has a spotty gas tank. He's never for whatever reason, he's never been able to really carry the weight up at these weight classes. He's tended to get exhausted pretty fast.
Yep.
And have to fight through it. I mean, he was able to do that somewhat against Diaz, but at a risk of being somewhat controversial. I don't think Diaz looked particularly great physically in that second fight.
No, I agree with you.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's just a matter of can Ferrera survive long enough, and I think you know what. I'm going to say yes.
Yeah. I think he can afford a knockdown. And if McGregor is just reticent about following him to the ground, that's might be enough for Ferrera to just get back up. He can save himself with the wrestling as well. Doesn't have to complete the shot or whatever, just has to tie McGregor up and make him work. Yeah, like again, it feels weird. McGregor's so established. Ferrera is just sort of coming to greater attention and just becoming the fighter he was meant to be. But he's too much like Nate Diaz without a lot of the specific stylistic deficiencies that allowed McGregor to ultimately outsmart Diaz. I think I'm picking.
This would be incredibly funny.
Yes,
if it actually somehow happened.
Yes.
It would be absolutely hilarious to watch.
So it has to be Diego Ferrera.
the biggest star ever in MMA lose to this quiet, modest man who just like happily retweeted the fight site's analysis of him.
Yeah. To some violent language arts teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Hilarious.
Well, I believe that makes our finals. Justin Gaethje versus Diego Ferrera?
Hell yes.
What the fuck? What happened? How did we get here?
I don't know, but I love it. This is the championship fight the people deserve.
I mean, this is a bloodbath, right?
Yeah, I think it's probably it's one of the rougher matchups for Diego Ferrera, unfortunately. Yeah. He's going to struggle to match Gaethje physically. He's going to have to basically walk himself into Gaethje's range. I don't think he's going to be able to pressure as effectively as he would be against like McGregor or someone like that. I mean, there'd be much more of a risk of him getting counterpunched against McGregor, but there's the difference against McGregor is that I think there's a safety zone that Ferrera could navigate into, which is the clinch.
Yes. And clinching with Gaethje is terrifying. He is also nightmarishly difficult to take and hold down. So Ferrera does not really have the phase shifting option. I think it's Gaethje. Gaethje probably knocks Ferrera dead.
Sadly, yes. Much as I would love to see UFC lightweight champion Diego Ferrera. I think perhaps like looking at this is actually a feasible thing that could happen with the right matchups in this scenario, but
100%.
Unfortunately not one which could happen given the promotional setup of the UFC. Yeah. They will never let Carlos Diego Ferrera near the title.
Yeah, he's certainly never fighting Conor McGregor.
Mm-hmm.
But if he were to do that, that would vault him right to the top of the division. And I honestly, I don't know that I expected this. I didn't think of it as a matchup coming in, but I think that is an eminently winnable matchup for Diego Ferrera. Very much so. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Justin Gaethje, congratulations. You will, of course, have to fight the 1,000-year ghost that Khabib Nurmagomedov leaves behind. Spectre forever looming over the division that he never really relinquished to you. But hey, it's a matchup that we may have picked you to win anyway. So good luck fighting the ancient haunting spirit of Khabib Nurmagomedov. That's lightweight, folks. We're going to take one more break. When we come back, rinse and repeat, but at 170, where, well, I'll tell you what happened to Kamaru Usman after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are moving on to the UFC welterweight division, and Kamaru Usman's hair fell out, his eyes rotted in his skull. He had a dry, hacking cough, which caused him to produce both of his lungs. He just one big cough, one lung in each hand. Really a grisly sight. He's doing okay, though. He is on the path to recovery. I'm confident that he will be back to attempt to reclaim this title. But in the meantime, we need to decide a new champion or an interim champion, perhaps. Maybe that's the way to look at this.
What did Kamaru Usman do to deserve all that?
What?
I feel like he's gotten off way worse than poor.
Well, he's alive.
I mean, just about.
The other two are dead. It's over for them.
No, they weren't, Conor, remember? That was the plan. We weren't going to be talking about killing UFC champions. Oh, God. Okay, fine. Get on with it.
I'm not killing them. It's the times. All right. Well, Kamaru Usman's doing fine. He's in recovery. It's going great.
Yes.
Which leaves us with these 8 fighters to vie for his vacated throne. Phil?
We have Tyron Woodley, Colby Covington, Jorge Masvidal, Leon Edwards, Stephen Thompson, Gilbert Burns, Michael Chiesa, and our wild card, Jeff Neal.
All right. Welterweight is still in a weird transitional period. We talked about this, I feel, I don't know, maybe half a year ago, before Usman ascended to the throne. Even like in that period just before Colby Covington had really launched himself to the top of the rankings, there was a lot of old driftwood still occupying the top 10 of this division.
How dare you talk about Robbie Lawler that way?
Okay. Well, but just a lot of venerable, experienced fighters who were probably, as we saw it at the time, and as history has confirmed, right on the cusp of slipping out of that top 10. And it's interesting because here at welterweight, the top 5, I guess, Stephen Thompson is part of the older crew, but still a tricky style matchup for a lot of these guys. The top 5 feels like very relevant, more or less, like the people who should be competing for the title right now. And then like 6 through 10 is really weird and feels like all of these guys are one loss away from being out of the top 15 altogether. So we left out Damian Maia. We left out RDA. We didn't even think of Nate Diaz. But I still think we've got a pretty interesting bracket here. I'm upset that Michael Chiesa is part of it. I'll say that much. I'm not going to forgive.
Well,
I'm not going to forgive
we had to
him.
rationalize this one.
Yeah,
because if RDA had beaten him, we would have included RDA.
True. Which, Phil, as you pointed out before, means that I am a racist.
Yep.
I hate Michael Chiesa because of the way he looks.
Yep.
Which is kind of true. All right. Our first matchup. Seed me, baby.
We have, and all these matchups are very interesting. Mm-hmm. We have Tyron Woodley against Jorge Masvidal.
Mm.
And I think this is interesting because there are some super tough matchups for Tyron Woodley in this top 8. And I don't know that Jorge Masvidal is actually one of them.
Yeah. Not the toughest, certainly.
Yeah. I think this is an eminently winnable matchup for Woodley.
Because what does... in the same way that the quitter is still buried inside Charles Oliveira's... It's beneath that veneer. The young veteran is still inside Jorge Masvidal, and he's figured out the instant dose of violence part of becoming a more consistent finisher in this stage of his career. But have we seen him against someone who just doesn't want to push him at all? Even against someone who doesn't want to push him and uses that sort of absence of activity as a sort of greater and more mysterious kind of threat to get inside Jorge Masvidal's head, to make him think defensively, which he so often did. It so often was the cause of the close decisions he lost. Like, how much is Tyron Woodley like Damian Maia, who, had almost a perfectly even fight with Masvidal, but certainly did not draw out much activity from Masvidal?
Yeah, and I think another question to ask is, how much is Tyron Woodley like Benson Henderson?
Ooh.
Because whilst Woodley's game, and we've often talked about it, is broadly kind of non-functional, or at least specifically non-functional without tons and tons and tons of athleticism.
Right.
And even then, it can still be effectively closed
it's
off.
Very, very, very narrowly effective.
Yeah. Benson Henderson was someone who fought against Masvidal with a toolkit made of jank.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things about Masvidal is that people can say, and people have said correctly, he's one of the most technically skilled fighters in MMA and has been for a very long time.
Yep, across the board.
He's good at pretty much everything. And he's probably he's probably more skilled than Benson Henderson at virtually every aspect of MMA apart from maybe wrestling.
Sure.
And that's a maybe. He's a much, on a technical standpoint, he's a much better striker than Benson Henderson.
Yeah. He may very well be a better wrestler, a more effective takedown artist.
Mm-hmm. And he lost that fight.
Yep.
It was close, but I thought he lost it. And it was because he just got discomforted. And he'd spent the whole fight with Benson Henderson backed up against the cage as well. But Bendo just kind of picked him off with weird low kicks and freaky jabs, and occasionally would just surge out with a big leaping left hand. Mm-hmm. Let's remember that particular dynamic. And Masvidal got frustrated, particularly when he got stuck in wrestling exchanges and couldn't get out in time.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, like the Darren Till matchup is much more in Masvidal's wheelhouse. Like, I don't think he wants to be backed up, but when an opponent comes out and insists on showing him what they can offer, he gets used to it. And he switched that flip in his mind that allows him to use the information gathered more aggressively, more proactively, but he still wants to read his opponent. There's that burst of initial violence that we tend to always get from him now, or at least we have in the last 3 fights. But then there's a bit of a lull. He wants to draw something out. He wants to see what his opponent is going to hit him with. He doesn't want to fight altogether recklessly. And that is the thing that makes Tyron Woodley effective when he is effective, is the thing that Dominic Cruz talked about on this show a long time ago when Pat and I had him on, was that sometimes people who just don't do anything are a lot harder to read. You don't get a feel for the tempo and the little ticks that precede their attacks when they just hardly ever attack.
And yeah, I mean, on this note, who is the most purely defensive fighter that Jorge Masvidal has fought recently?
Stephen Thompson?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Did he do well in that fight?
No, he did not. Now, Stephen Thompson, a way better back foot fighter than Tyron Woodley. Much deeper, much trickier. But, yeah, Masvidal didn't look great. He's not a great pressure fighter.
Well, I mean, the problem is, I think, fundamentally the same reason why Stephen Thompson isn't that great on the front foot, is that Masvidal is good at many things, but he does tend to throw strikes with his head bolt upright.
Yes, absolutely.
There's a reason why it was a meme that Masvidal would get flash knockdowns in the first round of every fight that he was in.
Yep. And he was on the front foot against Rustam Khabilov back when that happened.
Mm-hmm. So he's got some specific things he'll do, like where he will take his head off the center line as he closes in now, like the Darren Till knockout.
Yep.
But those are basically him shifting inside. This is not like him bobbing and weaving in the pocket. Too much of his career, I would argue, has been spent fighting people who are much smaller than him at lightweight and just picking them off with jabs because he's sure that they're much smaller than him. And
Woodley is not all that susceptible to big single attacks. He's, as I've said many times, Woodley is an underrated defensive fighter. It does not lead to offense. So you could question whether or not it is truly effective defense. But in purely defensive terms, not bad. So yeah, interesting. Is that the winnable matchup?
I think I'm going to pick Woodley.
I kind of might. I kind of side with you.
I just don't think Masvidal would like that fight at all.
Yeah,
I mean that in a literal sense. He would not find it enjoyable.
Yeah.
And he would get frustrated,
bored, frustrated, either making bad decisions or going back to his old habit of not making decisions at all, getting caught between a bunch of different ideas. Yeah, I kind of agree with you.
Yep. Tyron Woodley one step closer to regaining his belt.
I mean, he barely beat Lorenz Larkin, whom he also had against the fence a lot. Like, yeah, I think that is a tricky matchup for Masvidal. Okay. Well, take that, vaping scooter gang. Tyron Woodley's back. And depending on what happens next, he may be destined to reclaim the championship, although I kind of doubt it. What is our next quarterfinal matchup?
This is a fascinating one. And it is Leon Edwards, Colby Covington.
Ooh. We talked about this one as a hypothetical already before.
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases, this might end up being the final.
Yes. Yeah, it really might. It'd be a fascinating... This would be a great title fight. So it's tricky, right? Leon Edwards is so much sounder as a technician basically everywhere. Like we've given Colby Covington his due praise. Like we don't want to underrate him as a technician. There are things he does fairly well. But I think what we really discovered in that Kamaru-Usman fight, even if it was one in which Covington was consistently either winning the rounds or this close from winning the rounds, I think we did find out that a lot of that technique is pretty shallow. He's got sort of the beginnings of good serviceable footwork, and then you see it tested, or you see a matchup in which more is demanded of that footwork, and it's not really there. Defensively, he's an absolute void. If he can't just pour it on, he can passably perform in moments where he's not pouring it on. He can do the Aaron Pryor thing where he goes on the back foot a bit to catch his breath or to give a new look and then starts to pour it on again. We saw that process repeated many times in the Usman fight. But he can't really just win a fight doing that. He needs to be pressing forward. He needs to be pouring it on and exchanging and overwhelming his opponent. And I don't know. The tricky thing is like no one's really gotten to try that against Leon Edwards. It's kind of hard to get that momentum rolling. He'll catch you out with a big counter. He'll neutralize you with good footwork and distance management, or he'll accept you into the clinch and beat you up there. Or just kind of lock you down. And I do honestly think, given the success that Edwards had years ago now against Kamaru Usman, the surprising success he had in neutralizing Usman's wrestling, I think he could absolutely out-wrestle Colby Covington. Or at least keep him from getting any offensive wrestling really going. He could shut down those takedowns and keep him in the clinch where Usman also had the advantage.
Yeah, so I think this was an interesting one to think of because my first thought was that I was actually sort of favoring Covington because he can just overwhelm Edwards over time as Usman did back in the day.
Or Claudio Silva back before that.
Yeah, exactly. If he just kept bullying into takedown series and just throwing tons of semi-meaningless volume. Edwards' problem, I think, in this division is always going to be that he's a medium pace fighter.
Yeah.
And that guys like Usman and Covington can force a pace which he can't. Whether that's through wrestling or striking.
Yeah, it's the fact that they can do it with wrestling and striking both that makes them really effective, because we did see Edwards pretty effectively neutralize Vicente Luque.
But on the other hand, I feel like maybe there's too many of Covington's areas of approach which are there's too many areas of approach from Covington that he's at risk in, because on the one hand, he is just an offensively relentless but defensively void striker. So he's always relying on you being scared of his strikes when he comes in, essentially.
Right.
And Edwards is by far the best counterpuncher that he's fought.
Yep.
By a huge margin. And secondly, is that Covington is not a hugely effective clinch fighter. A wrestler, fine, yes, he's good there, but his fight against RDA, a lot of it was just hauling away for takedowns which weren't really coming, and struggling a lot in the clinch, and Edwards did much better in the clinch against RDA than Covington did.
Yep.
So I think there's two areas where I think that Covington might actually be soaking up more damage than he would be ready for.
Yeah. I think, honestly, everywhere he is a much more vulnerable defensively. I think that applies to his wrestling just as well as his striking. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if Edwards could get him down. RDA managed it a few times. So Edwards might actually be able to take over the wrestling a bit. I think unlike Kamaru Usman, he's probably a little less likely to be so pridefully intent on outstriking Colby Covington that he would do that. A bit more of a complete performance and arguably a more taxing one. Edwards has never really shown... Well, has he shown stamina issues?
I think he was starting to slow down a bit against Cerrone, which is concerning, but he was fine against RDA.
Yeah. So, I think Covington also slows down. He needs his opponent to be getting more tired than him. But I think everywhere Covington is just kind of shallow. Like, again, it was close, competitive. Usman's not really a striker. Like, it's not his A game. He's gotten a lot better at it. But even Usman, with like a pretty meat and potatoes beginning boxing game, he had sort of figured out Covington's entries and attacks by the 5th round of that fight. Covington he throws the same combinations. He goes for the same takedowns. He has a pretty narrow field of skill. It's the pace that makes it effective. And if you can neutralize either the pace by killing these entries and attacks before they can really get going, or if you can technically solve, if you can accept those entries and solve them but through superior technique, you can figure him out and beat him, and he won't come up with new ideas, new approaches round after round. He's just going to try harder and harder the same shit. And I honestly think Edwards might be able to figure him out on both of those fronts. He might just be able to keep Covington from getting rolling, or he might accept Covington into the clinches. He might accept Covington's exchanges and just counter him. So I really think I have to pick Leon Edwards here. I've talked myself into it.
Yeah, I agree. I think, fascinating fight. Would love to see it.
Absolutely. I just want to see anyone with a high pace push Leon Edwards, to be honest. I just want to see him deal with tough physical matchups and see how smart his game is.
Yeah, and he's just a pleasure to watch. He's just clean and consistent and just all around MMA goodness.
Eminently
all right,
competent.
Next up we have a cruel matchup. We have Michael Chiesa against Stephen Thompson. I'm going to pick Stephen Thompson. I don't know about you.
I think I'm going to pick Stephen Thompson as well, Phil. Need we say any more?
I do not know if we do.
He hits Michael Chiesa in the face and in the body, and he probably kicks his legs a little on the way to knocking him out.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Right.
Next.
Jeff Neal, Gilbert Burns, our final matchup.
Interesting.
Yeah?
Interesting. Let's see. Let me pull up Jeff Neal's record here. Get a feel for what matchups he has struggled with. I don't know. Thoughts? It's kind of a tricky one to figure out.
It's a tricky one, right? Because Burns has really just been able to... I think if we're talking Burns against technical strikers with takedown defense, his worst performance was Rashid Magomedov.
Yeah.
But Burns is much better than that nowadays. He's said himself that he was just not a competent striker back at that point.
Great.
And he is now.
Dan Hooker as well. Shades of the Magomedov performance in that fight too.
Mm-hmm. But, I mean, it's just a fact of life that he's just faced better competition than Jeff Neal has.
True. But are they matchups that are really well designed for him? I think they are. Like, it's notable that, like, Damian Maia, Gunnar Nelson, Alexei Kunchenko, none of these men are Dan Hooker or Rashid Magomedov. Mm-hmm. Jeff Neal's a lot more like that kind of style matchup. He can move off the back foot really well, got nice, tight technical footwork. He can throw long, straight punches, although he does sort of like to mix it up in the pocket, maybe a little more than is good for him sometimes. He's a very effective kicker. Thus far has been pretty damn difficult to out-wrestle, although we have to question the level of competition there. Like, Bilal Muhammad is probably the best wrestler he's fought, and no respect to the man whose name will never be forgotten, but he's arguably a worse wrestler than Gilbert Burns.
Yeah.
And Burns brings a really competent kicking game as well. I think that's one of his greatest strengths as a striker, is he's a hard, persistent kicker, especially low kicks. But he's a very effective kicker in basically every matchup he ever has.
Yeah, it's a real tough one because Burns really has just been, it's a weird thing, he's just been fighting grapplers mostly lately. Yeah. With the exception being Konchenko.
He sort of had like a early stages of RDA development in his career where he's just become competent enough as a striker and confident enough as a striker to start beating all of his fellow jiu-jitsu guys. But previously, against good, dangerous strikers, especially ones with counterpunching skills, he has gotten smoked.
Yeah, I think I'm going to pick Neil. Wasn't going to do it when I came in, but
yeah, I agree.
I'm thinking about how much of Burns' game is predicated on scaring people off and how difficult to scare Jeff Neal is.
Yep.
If you march forward throwing power at him, he is exactly the kind of guy to just punch you right in your face.
Yep. Did it to Mike Perry, did it to Nico Price. Hard to find two guys with more scarier like finish potential who bring more aggression and raw power. And Jeff Neal even got badly hurt by Nico Price and stayed perfectly calm and then finished him. So I think it's got to be Neal.
Yep. All right. So we have our first semi-final matchup, Tyron Woodley against Leon Edwards. And this is an easier matchup to pick, I think.
Yep, and it was supposed to happen until very recently.
Yep.
And I would have picked Leon Edwards.
I also would have picked Leon Edwards. I think there are things to be worried about in that Edwards is southpaw, which means that it's always just going to be close, and he's not a particularly jab-happy southpaw.
Right.
So I think he would always have the worry of the big right hand coming out at him.
And is that worry enough to turn that medium pace into a Woodley pace? Possibly.
Yeah. But I think the main thing which works for him is that he has an excellent control of distance and that he's happy to walk into the clinch.
Yes.
And we've seen from really, something we should have picked up on the Usman fight, you can just walk up to Tyron Woodley.
Right.
You can just, if you're not going to close the distance and you're not going to burst in on him, you can just literally stroll up to him and it will never trigger the explosion.
Yep.
And I think you can just do that and then elbow him.
If you're not going to reach desperately at the edge of your range and leave your chin hanging for that right hand, you can just smother it. Just get inside the arc of where that right hand is effective. And it is a distance weapon 100% for Tyron Woodley. It is not a close range shot. So yeah, I think Leon Edwards, and I agree, same method, just walks into the clinch. Maybe he has trouble there, Woodley's very strong, very capable wrestler, but can he keep that up? And I don't think he can. Edwards is just far too competent a wrestler, far too savvy on the ground as well. And like Kamaru Usman, who had tremendous success there, he is a really dangerous, not just clinch wrestler, but a clinch striker as well. So yeah, I think he kind of mauls Tyron Woodley by the end of that matchup.
Yep. And then we have, on what is becoming the striker side of the bracket, Stephen Thompson against Jeff Neal in our other semifinal.
Ooh. Boy, I don't know. I don't really know.
I know, much as it would be tempting to be like, oh, Jeff Neal is a next generation striker.
Dude, in matchups,
Stephen Thompson just doesn't lose striking matchups very often.
Right.
I mean, that awful Till fight aside.
Right.
And a weird Pettis knockout.
He loses against a very particular kind of approach, one which I do not see Jeff Neal wanting to fall into. I think Jeff Neal likes landing punches on people. I don't think he feels comfortable with the fight being that slow. And I know it pains our dear friend Luca Bordone to hear this. But Stephen Thompson, still good. Still probably the best striker in the division. Sorry.
Yeah, I think there's one thing to consider here.
Yeah.
And that's that Neal is a southpaw, right?
Yes.
I think that's one of the things that that Thompson doesn't like particularly. Again, he likes as much space as possible. He's particularly he's a rear hand fighter. So, and he tends to kind of throw the pull counter, or just basically move back and throw his rear hand whenever people are coming in. But I think he's much more comfortable doing it from southpaw.
He hasn't fought a lot of southpaws though.
Darren Till though.
Yeah, but that's not just the southpaw thing. That was Darren Till being menacing but not letting anything go. I think that was a bigger factor than the open stance or the southpaw thing, because otherwise the other southpaw is Johnny Hendricks.
Yeah,
Stephen Thompson absolutely shredded. Or before that, no, that's basically it.
Yeah, basically it.
Meanwhile, Tyron Woodley had much the same effect on Darren Till. It's just that they reversed positions in the cage. But I think it's the reluctance to lead and the ability to just comfortably deal with the pitter-patter kicking game. That just puts Stephen Thompson into a matchup where he doesn't have a lot of options and doesn't always feel that comfortable stepping forward and pulling the trigger first. So I don't know. This is a tough fucking matchup to call, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. He just hasn't lost. He hasn't really lost any convincing striking matchups.
Yeah. When he
that's
loses...
The Anthony Pettis match, he was winning pretty easily. Sorry, Luca. And the Darren Till one, nothing happened. I mean, Darren Till got the only knockdown. That's fine. I'm fine with him winning.
Yeah.
But nothing happened apart from that. It was you could debatably argue that Darren Till won it. Wait a minute, what would it be if there were 4 10-10 rounds?
Why would you want to debate it? This is worse than when Pat and I almost tore each other's heads off arguing about Elias Theodorou versus Cesar Ferrera. Who cares who won this fight? No one won.
It was a 50. He won it. Darren Till won it 50-49.
Yeah, 50-49. That's right. 4 draw rounds and then 1 round in which something happened.
So I don't know. He got in trouble. He got himself in trouble against Nico Price. That's the problem.
Yeah. Jeff Neal does like to fight off the back foot, though. Does he sort of neutralize Stephen Thompson's counter-punching preference, and does that give us an abysmal fight? It's possible.
Yes, I think that's what we're coming to the conclusion here, is that this fight would suck.
Because what makes this fascinating to think about is that it's incredibly risky for both guys to be the one to take the initiative. And I think we have a feeling for how that tends to play out in Stephen Thompson fights. Either Jeff Neal does not have the discipline and experience to avoid that and loses, or it's an incredibly tepid fight in which...
it's a complete toss-up.
Yeah. All right, it's Stephen Thompson. Heads.
Okay. Yeah. I guess we couldn't have Kevin Holland being the lineal welterweight champion.
Why not?
Okay, so that leaves us with our final. Stephen Thompson against Leon Edwards.
Oh, thank God. For a second, I forgot what had happened, and I thought it was going to be Stephen Thompson, Tyron Woodley 3. I had such a traumatic moment there. Whew. All right. Well, is this fight any better than that one? So the thing about Stephen Thompson is he is really fantastic, but there's just a kind of matchup where just nothing happens. He's either honestly, tremendously exciting in the right matchup or the most boring fighter on earth.
this fight again, gotta say, would be atrocious.
I think really bad, really, really slow. I mean, look at the beginning of Leon Edwards' fight with Donald Cerrone before things really got cooking. Except add into that a much harder time like landing cleanly. Much fewer like committed kicks to counter. There's definitely a chance that Edwards could go back to his old bullshit and land an Anthony Pettis style counter. Just catch Stephen Thompson getting lazy with his footwork, catch him slightly out of position after he's throwing one of those side kicks, and leap forward and land the left hand that he used to knock out old Seth Bashinsky. But probably nothing happens for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. Damn, yeah, this fight might be grim.
Would Leon Edwards wrestle?
I think he would if he could, but again, no one's... I mean, aside from Woodley just pulling Thompson into huge blast doubles off the fence, no one's really wrestled Stephen Thompson since Matt Brown.
It's hard to do. It's hard to track him down, keep him in front of you, and line up the shot. Even when he's against the fence, pretty good at getting off of it and moving side to side. So even if we're assuming that this version of Edwards had the wherewithal to walk in and clinch Tyron Woodley, totally different getting that to happen consistently against Stephen Thompson. Well,
I don't want Stephen Thompson to be the champion.
Well, the thing is he doesn't tend to win these matchups that are really boring and slow. At the very least,
good point.
On optics, there's always this weird feeling that he's the one that could be doing more, and he just doesn't. So, it's Leon Edwards. Sorry, Stephen. You're not going to change your ways. And, he just doesn't end up looking good or convincing when he's in one of these nothing fights. The opponent at least postures in such a way that they could be assumed to be getting the better of things.
Yeah, it's true.
Really?
And Edwards is still a reasonably big puncher, and should they ever clinch up or get into like takedown situations, he's going to win that.
Yeah. Really anticlimactic.
Yeah.
Tournament final. Given the insane results we got in the last two, Leon Edwards versus Stephen Thompson is arguably the most likely of all the matchups we've had so far, and certainly the one that I want to see the least.
Yeah, God, just abysmal. I mean, we had an episode where we talked about how much we like Stephen Thompson, or how much, he's underrated and how he can actually be super fun. Mm-hmm. But this is really a reminder that there's a reason why we shouldn't want him in title contention track anymore, because he has the potential to stink up an awful lot of stuff. Yeah,
I just want him, just pick your next aggressive up-and-comer and put him against Stephen Thompson. Let him be the anti-pressure fighter gatekeeper. And that's it. He has forfeited his right to any future title matchups. As much as I like the guy, as much as I enjoy his performances when he's on, I really can't forgive him for those two Tyron Woodley fights. Or the Darren Till fight, which was somehow worse because there was not even one dramatic moment, really. So sorry, Steven, but Luca Bordone laughs last. Okay, that's it. That is the Corona Clash 2020. We are left with interim champions, assuming that our erstwhile champions make a full recovery. Most of them won't. Who was our bantamweight champ again? Corey Sandhagen.
Yep.
Fascinating. Justin Gaethje, champion at lightweight. And Leon Edwards, champion at welterweight. All of these honestly seem like some of the guys I might pick as like top seeds to be future champions were they to get the right matchups. But they're all championship caliber fighters who are very tough matchups for a wide variety of opponents. They're very stylistically flexible. And I think that really matters for championship potential. That's certainly the conclusion we came to deciding just now that Stephen Thompson doesn't fit the bill.
Yep. I think, all of them have, because that was the problem with Stephen Thompson, is that when he has those matchups, he has to get through multiple 50-50s.
Yeah.
And that's and he's been dropped too many times as well. Then it's making, and he is the oldest and frailest, and pretty much the last, I don't think he's necessarily the last remnant of his generation in that elite top tier, but he's definitely had the longest combat sports career.
Oh, yeah.
And things like the Luque win that was a remarkable turn to form. But I think of all these people, he is by far the most likely one to suddenly have a shocking drop-off.
Yeah. Even if that Luque fight plays out, we rewind the clock and it plays out exactly the way it did, even with Stephen Thompson doing as well as he did, there were a lot of, as you said, 50-50 moments that he just may not have survived. All right, well, there are our 3 new champions. I think this was a pretty fun premise, to be honest. A good way to pass the time in the long interim between cards. We will be coming back to you guys again next week. This week, don't fret. I'm going to get bonus content up on the Patreon. I had trouble with the McCallum-Columbe thing, syncing issues where the video frame rate, once it's processed, no longer aligns with the audio. It just gets more and more out of sync the further on into the video it goes. I think I've sorted that out, how to prevent that from happening. So look for some boxing commentaries coming. Phil, you and I were talking about doing another a whole event commentary for the Patreon as well. We already did
sounds good.
UFC 2, whatever it was, the
189,
the Lawler McDonald 2 card. But there are other fantastic main cards that we could do. So what do you say, Phil? Not to put pressure on you, but do you want to commit to doing one of those this week?
Let me think. I might be actually busy this week because we've got we're doing the Depressos tomorrow, and then I think I've got my mom's birthday the day after that. So
wow. You heard it here, folks. Phil's mom comes before you, our dear listeners. Well, unlike Phil, I have no family, but all of you. And so maybe I will try to either do one by myself or bring someone in to do it with me. Maybe I can persuade Mookie or Zane Simon or someone like that we can talk shit to each other over the course of a classic UFC main card. But do keep your eyes peeled and glued to the Heavy Hands Patreon, where for just $3 a month you can get access to all of our bonus content. And thank you all so much for listening. I'm going to assume that neither Phil nor I has any work coming out with any certainty for you to check on bloodyelbow.com, but that is where you can find all of our writing when we are producing it. And you can also find us on social media. Phil is at Evil Craig Jackson on Twitter, and you can find me at Boxing Bush, BUSCH. And that's about it. Thank you all once again for listening. And if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands. Kamaru Usman is dead.
Also, I cannot believe you cut our segment about the Women's Flyweight Championship. Admittedly, those things you were saying about what happened to Valentina Shevchenko were completely disgusting, but people want to know about their new champion, Caitlin Cagey.
I wanted to put it in. You're the one who got your fucking panties in a twist because of... I mean, that's what this disease does to the human body, Phil.
I'm pretty sure it doesn't.